This is 100x Gaming on the 100x podcast. We are sitting down with Sparkball. Chandler, the founder of Sparkball. So glad to have you here, man. We have been playing your game lately. Caesar was up till midnight last night playing. So this is a great time to have a conversation about it. Why don't you introduce Sparkball to us and what the heck you're building?
Yeah, so Chandler Tomlinson, founder of Opti Games, which is making Sparkball. Sparkball is a 4v4 kind of sports brawler-ish game. Most people just keep it simple and say it's League of Legends meets Rocket League, or it's FIFA, but you kill each other. So the entire idea, the game revolves around balancing what we call ballin' and brawlin'. So you're fighting, but at the same time, you're trying to score goals. And it's figuring out what to do at what point in time that I think makes the game so exciting. But it's a blast. Super fun.
Cool. Awesome. Give me a breakdown. If I have never played League, if I'm one of the like 4 people like myself actually that have never played League, if I was going to sit down and play one game, what does the gameplay loop look like?
Yeah, so you pick a hero, pretty much like a hero shooter game if you've played Overwatch or any game like that. Super similar. You pick a hero, they have unique abilities. The big difference between us and something like your League of Legends or Dota is you move around with WASD instead of click to move. So the game moves a lot quicker. It's a little bit more Twitch mechanical based. So you pick a hero, you start a match, it's 4v4, and you all jump into the center and try to grab a ball. And while you're trying to grab the ball, everybody's flinging fireballs and swords and stuff at each other, trying to kill each other. You grab the ball and then you pass it around, and the goal, or trying to find another word for goal. The objective is to throw the ball into the goal.
The goal is to hit the goal.
Yeah, the goal is to hit the goal. So you throw the ball into the goal, and then that basically kicks off like a mini sequence that you're killing different things. And so it's this constant back and forth of, hey, I've got to shoot the ball in this objective while I'm also trying to battle off, stop interceptions and save the ball. It's best of 3 rounds, and there's a final goal. So you throw the ball in the goal multiple times. So you throw the ball in the objective multiple times, and then eventually the main goal opens up, and scoring in that main goal ends 1 round, and then it's best of 3 rounds. So games typically take about 10 to 20 minutes. There's basically like a hard cap, so you barely ever go over 20 minutes, which I think is one of our strengths.
Yep.
But yeah, super quick paced. It's just like next game, and it feels really refreshing. I think is what I'd say.
It's fun. Before we dig into everything this episode has to offer, we want to highlight the awesome partners who sponsor this podcast and make it possible for us to work full-time on 100x. They're legends, and we appreciate them for supporting us. Let's talk about Reactor, a proof-of-work blockchain that introduces a brand new economic model, DePIN mining software, a gaming distribution platform, the RKR token, and their game, Minions of Steel, that's proving their thesis by seamlessly integrating proof-of-work token mining with gaming. Through allowing players to mine with their own GPU while playing, not only do they essentially make gaming free, they make software free, and they present an AI-proof income for everyone. If you want to take a glimpse into the future and get there early, explore Reactor's ecosystem at the link below. Crypto does not need to be complicated. Cadena is building the human layer of blockchain by giving the power back to the people and allowing them to build products that make a difference for humanity. Founded by ex-JP Morgan and SEC blockchain leads, Cadena develops easy-to-understand, human-readable tools and solutions that focus on the long-term development of the space, not just short-term gains. Simply put, if we want real, regular people to enter and enjoy Web3, Cadena is making a way. To learn more, check out Cadena.io, follow them on Twitter at Cadena_IO, or watch our episode with them. Everybody is chasing the sweet nectar of played airdrop. Could the Beacon potentially be the most fun iteration of the meta thus far? The Beacon is a collision of 3 game genres at once. Think dungeon crawler like Hades, world builder like Animal Crossing, and social MMO like RuneScape. Right now, you can complete quests to unlock the token airdrop and whitelist through our New Frontiers quest link in this episode's description. Follow the Beacon on Twitter for deets on the rite of passagement and the game's global launch. And let us know in the comments how many of the bosses you can actually beat. I would say it's one of the most polished games in Web3 gaming that I've touched right now. Actually had fun, have no complaints besides me just being bad. There was nothing I could blame the game about. Anything that
10 to 20 minutes, it wasn't like that against Matthew. It was more like 2 to 3 minutes.
Oh, come on. That's crazy. Hey, I scored a couple points maybe. Who is your favorite character to play as, your favorite hero to play as, Chandler?
Yeah, we talked about it. I think everybody on this call is a Hot Paws main, apparently.
I think Kana is my favorite right
Okay,
now.
I like
but
that.
I like Hot Paws too.
Yeah, I've been I play Hot Paws and Inna mostly. And the funny thing about Inna is we've been around for a long time. We've been playtesting this game for several years now, to say the least. And so there are clips of me playing Inna probably 4 or 5 years ago. So the amount of games I have on that character is absurd.
Way
But
more than us.
I'm falling in love with Hot Paws more and more recently. Just because he's just annoying and goofy. And
Big
I
old
enjoy that.
fiery tank. I like
Yeah.
Kana just because I think the gimmick is fun. The food truck and the
Yeah.
it's just it's a spin you don't really see in fighting games very often.
Somebody, our chief narrative, Matt Dunn, told me something that stuck with me forever. Is he said, not a character doesn't have to be for everyone, but everyone has to have a character. And I think that's so important for us. And like, there's a character called Snooker, who, if you ask 90% of the players in our game, is like, I hate Snooker. Screw that character. I never want to play against him. I never want to play him. But then the 10% of people that play him are just like, I love Snooker. I will never play anybody else. This is it. And I think that's the strength of a game, is like when you have heroes like that, where everybody feels so unique, that the different personalities show of like, hey, I like doing this.
It's personality.
Well,
it's exactly personalities. I think that's one thing that hero shooters, if done properly, really nail, is that everyone gets to essentially insert their personality into the game. And when you say like, oh, this is my main, it's not just I like the artwork or I like the play style or I like the lore. Like it's all of it together.
It's everything. I totally agree.
Yeah, it's a blast. Well, like I said, man, I am genuinely having fun playing it. I think everyone that I've talked to is genuinely having fun playing it. I have not heard a lot of complaints. I asked a couple of actual gamers this morning. I said, hey, I'm jumping on this is in a private call. No one knows who they are. And I said, hey, I'm jumping on a podcast today with Chandler. If you had some questions or some critiques or anything, and there was zero about gameplay, nothing. Gameplay, everyone loves right now. And I think that's a massive win in my book.
Yeah, it's figuring everything else out that we got to do.
Yeah, exactly. My question on gameplay, last question on gameplay is, you guys have been in development for a long time, like you said, literal years. What other fun things are coming that people should be excited about in terms of gameplay?
That's a great question. So I think it took us a long time to find it, but we eventually found what we'd call the core loop of the game, and what most people in game dev call like finding the fun. And finding the fun essentially means like I can play this loop pretty much endlessly in a way, just not having to worry about progression or cosmetics or unlocks or anything like that. And I think we finally found that stage where it's just fun to walk around and cast spells and attack people. It's just fun. So now that we have that done, I think there's a lot remaining on what we'd call meta systems on the game, which is all of that stuff that I just talked about, kind of the retention loops and things going beyond that. That's not super glamorous. No one's really excited about that other than new heroes. Everybody loves new heroes, of course. It adds a ton of elements to the game. I think the biggest stuff coming up for us is more on the Web3 side. And this is kind of what I was joking about of like, look, we've got gameplay figured out. How do we take this to the next level? And I think there's really two things that I'm really excited about. The first one is what we call Fantasy Sparkball. So that'll be coming hopefully early next year. And if you've ever played like fantasy football or anything through ESPN or Yahoo, same exact thing, except you draft Sparkball heroes. And we actually run these AI versus AI. So we plan to do like these all AI generated leagues where you're watching the matches and your knowledge of the game is more important than how good you are at the game. So Matt, I know we were joking earlier of like, hey, I'm not that good at the game yet. Well, you could still be the best fantasy Sparkball player. So I'm really excited about that. I think it just builds so much IP attachment. And I think more importantly, it allows people to play asynchronously. And that is super important in Web3 when you think about like farming and the people that are just like, how do you balance the degenerates that can play all day versus the people who are like, I'm at work, but I can at least open another tab to play Fantasy Sparkball to keep up with everybody here. So really, really excited about that just for on like a personal level. But I think the long-term vision with Sparkball is UGC. So if anyone's ever played Unreal for Fortnite, super similar.
Too many hours.
Fortnite main game mode is fun. The core loop of Fortnite is fun. Personally, not a fan, but it is fun. Can't deny that. But
I have over 2,000 hours in the core game.
Okay, so you think it's fun.
I'm your guy.
It is not for me, but I acknowledge that the core loop is super fun. And what that means is that you can take that core loop and now implant it into different game modes. Not everything has to be a battle royale. And I think the longevity of Fortnite has significantly exceeded how long it should be around because of all these custom game modes. And so we realized the same thing about Sparkball pretty early on. You can basically take away the goals, take away the towers, but keep the fighting in the ball. And now what game mode do you want to put this in? Because it will work in pretty much anything. So we went out and we made Vampire Survivors a couple months ago just for internal testing. And it was a blast because it's like, oh, now I'm throwing this ball around and I'm dodging and I'm dipping and all these things. And so we long-term want to roll out UGC. So Sparkball will kind of be like, we call it official Sparkball, where, okay, we want to keep people in this loop. We want to use it. But like, look, people's attention spans are short. We're not claiming to be Dota. We're not claiming to be League of Legends. I don't expect people to play 20,000 hours of Sparkball for 15 years straight. We want to have people fall in love with the characters, the world, the IP, the story, the gameplay of Sparkball, and then turn them into fans. And I think Warcraft 3 is a great example for anyone that's a little older of we saw exactly this. Everybody played Warcraft 3 RTS for a year. Everybody started playing custom maps. And every genre basically nowadays comes from Warcraft 3 custom maps. And I think we can do the same thing with Sparkball 100%.
Yeah. I do have a little quick question before we move on to the little Web3 aspects, but that Vampire Survivors game mode, is that coming at all? Because, I mean, I'm a huge fan of vampires. I'm falling in love with Sparkball, mixed the two, and I'm going to have a blast in there.
Yeah, it's internal only right now. It is not polished up, but it will be out eventually. I think the big thing for us on the custom game mode stuff is we want to use that as kind of like our Web3 launching board. So it's a little complicated, but it sounds crazy. There's actually no NFTs and no tokens in official Sparkball. So Sparkball is not a Web3 game. And the reason why we talk about it that way is because we're on Steam. We're already signed with Xbox. Like Microsoft's already approved the Web3 plan. Like we don't have to worry about any of that. Custom Sparkball is a completely different matter. So what I want to be able to do, Caesar, is like, hey, I made this Vampire Survivors map as a guild or my DAO. But you have to own this NFT in order to play this map. But if you complete the map, you get a token distribution from this DAO, this guild, whatever it is. And so we want to allow people to integrate it there and really allow people to get super creative on custom maps because Unreal has the payouts to creators, but it's, based solely on number of people and all that good stuff. So, yeah, we want to, as excited as I am, like, as a game designer, I would just want to go finish Vampire Survivors Sparkball and like finish it and just have everybody play it. But the roadmap is the roadmap, unfortunately.
I think that's a very interesting approach to Web3. I don't think we've seen a lot of games say, hey, you know what, we're going to take out the Web3 aspects of it from the core game itself and allow people to use Web3 aspects if they want to through UGC. Why was that decision something that you guys made?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think we talk pretty openly and honestly about it. Is that we launched early access last year, and we launched what most people would describe as like Web 2.5. And frankly, it was more like Web 2.1. Like we didn't talk about NFTs, we didn't talk about tokens. We focused really, really hard on minimizing Web 3 and Sparkball. And our entire goal was like, we want Web 2 gamers to come in and be okay and play this game because we all know how Web 2 gamers feel about Web 3 right now. Like it's a pretty difficult hump to get over. And we constantly said, okay, we have a good enough game that Web 2 gamers are going to be totally fine with this. And we were right. So 95% of our audience was Web 2 for our early access last year. But that was also a problem in itself. 95% of our audience was Web 2. That means we had no Web 3 traction. We had no one was excited about NFTs. No one was excited about tokens. And so what we realized is that by minimizing it, we basically just killed it. Nobody cared. There was no speculation. There was clearly no focus on it. And so what we realized is that instead of minimizing, we needed to be separated. And so we look at Sparkball as a retention tool in a way, and we look at Web3 as a monetization tool. So you play Sparkball, and our goal is to keep you playing Sparkball for as long as possible, which means super friendly monetization, super friendly content plans. And then we allow you to coach, own, operate, create, etc. Sparkadia, which is kind of that Web3 layer. So it's a layer that sits on top of Sparkball. And we think by separating that, you're essentially saying like, hey, Web 2 gamers, you don't even have to do any of this if you don't want to. But the problem with saying that in most games is like, hey guys, you don't have to do any of this if you don't want to, but you're going to miss out on a shit ton of content in the game if you don't. That sucks. That's not a good feeling. Nobody wants to hear that as a Web 2 gamer. And so I think by separating it, Web 3 people want economy. And I think trying to build economy, a self-sustaining creative or creator token-based economy in a competitive game, I don't think can be done personally. And I think a lot of people talk about like, oh, I'm designing all these different NFTs and economy systems into the game. And the reality of the fact is that while it may work on the surface, you are actively hurting the retention of your game in the long term. It's impossible not to. This is not like a game problem. It's not a designer problem. I just think it's literally impossible because they're conflicting ideas. They are literally conflicting ideas. And so we think that it has to be split. And I hope I'm wrong, because there's a lot of games that have some pretty cool plans on how they're doing it. You start getting into like gacha games and MMOs and trading card games, totally different. Totally different.
You're talking
But
competitive games,
Yeah.
the economy needs to be separate.
I think so. Yeah, we absolutely think so. And I also think it opens up way more possibilities. You try to cram something in the game, and now all of a sudden you're super limited. So we're really, really excited about the platform. Admittedly, like, it hasn't been a huge focus for us. That's obvious. But, the general plan was get everybody to fall in love with Sparkball and then allow us some space to breathe on building out the rest of it. And I think that's exactly what we've done at this point.
And as someone from the outside, how will that layer, Sparkadia, that's outside of the core game loop, benefit Sparkball on itself? Like, where were you guys benefiting from adding Web3 aspects outside of the main core loop?
Yeah, I think you bring in an entire new audience of people. There's a lot of people that like Sparkball is a relatively difficult game to play. I would say it's like easy to pick up, but very difficult to master. And not everybody's yeah. The controls are, you have to be somewhat dexterous to use the controls and play the game well. And so I think about people who are like, hey, I don't have 2-3 hours a day to play a game, but I like games, and Sparkball is, a 10 to 15 minute game. I can go in 1 or 2 times a day and operate this. I think more than just a game, like everybody and their brother, we're building an ecosystem and an IP. Now, I'm of course obligated to say I think our IP is really good, given the people that we have behind it and a lot of the stuff we've created. But we want other ways to engage with Sparkball, because that increases the overall longevity of the game. I have thousands upon thousands of hours in League of Legends. I would have quit by now if I wasn't also watching League of Legends esports. Every now and then I watch some competitive matches and I get the itch and I go back and play a few games and I come back.
And that's me with Fortnite, honestly.
Yeah.
Like, Fortnite has pissed me off so many times that I would have quit. But at the high level, it doesn't piss me off what they do with the low level. And so I watch those, I'm like, oh man, I miss that.
Exactly.
And I go back and play.
Yeah, and I think the other super important thing beyond just like, there's other ways to engage, because it refreshes your mind. Like, it's like, okay, I still like all these things. But I think the other thing is like, someone told me a long time ago, if a player cannot spend $1 million in your game, you've designed the wrong monetization system. And I think that's really interesting. But part of it is like, let's put greed aside and all of that. Like, you can have certain players subsidize the rest of the game for everybody else. And I don't like, that's not saying, we want to take advantage of whales. That's not saying we want to take advantage of people. But the reality is like, if 95% of your people just want to engage with content in Sparkball and just want free skins and free new heroes and everything like that, you have the ability to give that to them based on the economic elements from the Web3 side. And so it just opens up a lot of doors. The way that I always just go back to is it's multiple ways to engage with Sparkball beyond just the game. And I think that's by far the most
So in your
important
mind, the Web3 aspect of gaming, so Web3 gaming itself, essentially alters or revolutionizes the way that you can monetize games. It doesn't need to impact the gameplay. It just needs to change the way that games are monetized.
I think so, yeah, and it can impact the gameplay, but I'm still skeptical on that. Obviously, if it's based on if what I'm saying is not obvious, I'm still a little skeptical on that. But yeah, I think it's both acquisition and I also think it's retention. So I think the whole questing and play to airdrop stuff is frankly incredible, for lack of a better term. And I think when you look at a lot of the successful games in Web2 the last year and a half, Power World, Lethal Company, Helldivers, BattleBit, games like that, where they're like sub $10 million budgets and they've just popped off and gone insane. That is a miracle in traditional games.
Oh, for
does
sure.
not happen very often, because first of all, they had to have $10 million in the first place, which is very difficult to get in traditional Web2. And it's also people who didn't have the background, didn't have the pedigree, didn't have the means to raise traditional money like us. We have a lot of people that worked at Riot, but it didn't start that way. And so probably by far the thing I'm most excited about in Web3 is it gives people like us a shot. And I'm not just talking about like, we can raise money through a token. Hooray, we're doing Web3 for money.
Really, anyone who is an indie developer, like, this is essentially a safe haven. Maybe safe haven is the wrong word, but it's like it's a playground that you're invited to play on.
Exactly. And I think, like, again, it's not about like, oh, we could raise money, oh, we can take players' money. It's about being able to use the mechanisms of Web3 to bring in users, to generate excitement, to be able to get to that level where all of a sudden now, oh, okay, now I'm a household name. Now I can do what I want to do. And now I can push this. So, I think for us, like, we not a super high budget game. We don't have a ton of cash. But from a marketing perspective, I can now use the points and the airdrops and the questing to bring in all these brand new users. And now all of a sudden, I have a fighting chance. And I think that's all indie devs want, honestly, is a fighting chance.
Yeah,
I
someone
want
to play my game. Right?
Yeah, I want to be judged on the greatness of my game. And if it's not great and players don't like it, then it's my fault. But I think one of the issues that a lot of game developers run into with traditional gaming development is they never even get that shot. Because it's impossible to get over that initial hump. I would not be here if I didn't get lucky, have a good job in my 20s, and have enough money to start the company in the first place. And then the next step was like getting that initial round of funding, which again, I never would have done without Web3. So I think I just want to see indie devs like us succeed. And I think Web3 is such a great way to do that. And getting the community involved and building out what I would call like your army is like, I love Web3 community. Absolutely love it. The amount of passion that people have for this stuff. And part of it's passion, part of it is like they're backholders in a way. And so everybody's incentivized
Everyone
to help
cares.
you and wants you to be successful.
Which means they'll really love you or they'll really hate you.
Exactly. And that's fine.
They care a lot.
Exactly.
I'm curious, while we're on the point of like Web3, the Web3 aspects that you guys are actually tying in, obviously the bulk of that is the user-generated content. A little bit of alpha. It's okay if the answer's not yet, but are you guys working directly with any other games or communities or DAOs behind the scenes? I know that the user-generated content is not ready, but are there people that you're talking with that are like excited about building that now?
So we are not planning to integrate other IP directly. We're working on the mod tools now, but
so no on games, but maybe communities and DAOs.
Yeah, but it's mostly up to them essentially. So we're going to give them the tools to create whatever they want. And then it's up to them to kind of figure out that structure on how they want to integrate it. Yeah, the whole interoperability between assets and things like that, like that's not for us. We're very, very protective about our ecosystem. Like we don't like IP brand dilution and stuff like that. But is it exciting to think like, oh, we're going to see a little pudgy penguin walking around in Sparkball someday in a custom created map? Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited about that. So it goes both ways.
Do you have a question here in the sense of like, from a listener right now, maybe what I'm hearing is, hey, the Web3 aspects aren't really going to be inside the core game of Sparkball, but a lot of the outside stuff with the user-generated content. How do you guys at Sparkball actually ensure that this game is a Web3 success when you guys are leaving that up to the hands of other people that are not you guys?
Yeah, I would say like that the UGC is like the big long tail, like everything, like this is the sustainability of the game, 10 years from now, that's super important. I think like we, as someone who launched, again, largely a Web 2.5, Web 2.1, or whatever you want to call it, project last year, we realized that we need to focus infinitely more on Web 3, all of that stuff. So I think it's a big focus for us right now of like answering your question directly of like, how do we do that? And I think ultimately step one is always going to be, how do you tie Web3 success to the success of the game? Because you can have the most fun game in the world and you can have 10 million players, but like if that doesn't reflect in the token or the NFTs or that Web3 ecosystem, it literally does not matter. And so I can't share a ton on that, but like we have mechanisms that's basically like the more money people spend in the game, the more the token is going to go up essentially. So like very simple, direct, one-to-one comparison. So I think we really look at it as like, look, Sparkball is the player's generator. We want people to fall in love with the IP through playing. We want people to enjoy the game, enjoy what they're doing in the game. And then that translates into the Web3 piece. So it's almost like you're bringing people into the Web3 piece. And I think our biggest strength on that is we have the ability to bring an entire new class of users into Web3. And so while I'm very open and honest, like we are never going to be like the pixels of Web3. We are never going to be the degenerate farmers. And like, this is no shade to pixels. Like, congratulations.
Luke was on the podcast last week.
I mean, insane. I wish we were that. Don't get me wrong. But that's not us. But at the same time, we can bring in this entirely new class of users that will not engage with Web3 otherwise. And I think it's kind of up to us on like, okay, how do we turn that into Web3 success while still having some of these degenerate, and I don't mean that negatively at all, the more Web3 type culture based. And I think it's balancing those things out that's going to be really interesting for us. But that's the entire idea of having a platform rather than just building Web3 into the game.
Right.
Is that we can be a little flexible. Like Fantasy Sparkball is like, that would came out of nowhere in a way until we met a company that did machine learning bots. And we were like, wait a second, this is all of a sudden super interesting. And now all of a sudden there's there. So I think we can be pretty flexible on the Web3 stuff. And that's, again, we have this army of Web3 people that are hopefully in love with the game. And they're like, hey, I would really like to be able to do this. Great. We have an entire platform that supports something like this.
Exactly. It's a world that they can build inside of.
Exactly.
I'm curious on this. You mentioned that you guys specifically really tried to go the Web2 route and allow the Web3 to be ignored, I think was the word you used. And then you very clearly are switching. And I think public pivots provide tons of room for people on the outside to just critique the heck out of you if they're not inside the room. I've got the man in the arena quote up here, because in my mind, that's something I have to remind myself all the time of like, hey, if I'm the one making the decisions, if I'm the one getting dirty, if I'm the one trying to build something, it's a lot easier for me to give myself grace. But sometimes people on the outside will be like, oh, look at the way you're switching. You guys suck. You failed at this. You failed at that. I'm curious what it was. So people that have been watching this whole time, maybe people that have been here from the beginning, what it was that made you say, hey, we need to switch the way that we've handled the separation of these two things. We need to pivot in how we handle that.
That's a good question. I think there's two things on this. I think, first of all, if you talk to any VC, any gamer, any Web3 gamer this time last year, and we did every single pitch call we went into, we asked the same exact question. We said, what are you guys looking for in a Web3 game right now? And you would get the same answer 98% of the time, which was, I really, really want a game that can mass adopt Web2 users into Web3. I really want a game that's just gameplay first, fun first. Everything else doesn't matter. We just want a really fun game. And then I would spend 20 minutes telling them, guys, I got the best surprise for you. We nailed it. Like, we proved it. Our metrics are insane. They're through the roof. We did it. And the first question, 98% of the time, was, when's your TGE? What's your NFT floor price? How many Twitter followers do you have? It was all of the typical Web3 metrics that people wanted to see. And I get it. I think when you think about liquidity and you think about investing and you think about the Web3 space in general, super sustainable mass adoption games are not lucrative in comparison to instant liquidity, high farming, high yield, all of these things projects. Us having a fun game technically does not matter in the grand scheme of things, unless you're just like, hey, I have a 4-year outlook. Even if Sparkball is going to be the game that's around in 5 years where no other game is, who cares? if I'm an investor. And so I think we really, like, I had to finally put myself in the investor's shoes and understand that after getting told no a bunch of times.
Yeah.
I think the second part on the pivot is we have a lot of goodwill, I think, with our community, because they know that, like, it wasn't like a, hey, we wanted to screw everybody over on the Web3 front. It was very personal. I think anybody that came through with our early access, we had, a host of tech issues, but nobody cared because we were right there with them in the trenches. Like, hey, here's exactly how we're doing it. And so I think one of my both biggest strengths and weaknesses is transparency. And so I think we've just been really honest with players of like, look, we had these old NFT collections, for example, and admittedly, like, we did absolutely nothing for them. And granted, they were free, so I don't feel super bad about it. But at the same time, like, you made people waste their time. Some people actually traded them. There was a paid collection and all this stuff. So I think we went to those players and we're like, hey guys, we really screwed this up. Like, the strategy didn't work. We understand that. How do we actually come back and help you guys out? Now, what do you want to see? What can we do with these that would make you happy, that would make you feel like this isn't a waste? So I think as long as, like, you're in front of people and like, look, I really want this to succeed. And I think nobody that knows us doubts our passion and conviction about what we're doing. And I think we have that trust built in somewhat. And I think there's still a lot of people that are skeptical. Like, I think there's a lot of people that bought, our NFTs last year that probably aren't going to buy them this year. And that's okay. So I think, to finally answer your question directly, like, look, the pivot is tough and we expect to get some criticism. We already have. But I think we want skepticism, not criticism. Because I think everybody generally understands where we are, and that's okay. Like, hey, I don't want to invest right now because you haven't proven it out. And I think that's totally fine. I encourage everybody to, like, wait. That's fine with us. Let us prove it, but at least give us a chance to prove it. And I think that's what most teams want the opportunity to do. And I think that's how we've tried to position ourselves, essentially.
Yeah, I did have a question here, and I think this ties into to sort of what you were saying. I think that's the only thing that I've heard from people that had played the game before. Everyone that's tried it out or barely heard about Sparkball for the first time is just loving it. I mean, I'm having a ton of blast. I think this is one of 3 games that I'm able to just hop in and feel like I'm just here for the fun and not really thinking about the Web3 aspect of things. But for people who had played the game before, like a year ago or a year and a half, and did hold those NFTs, they do have that little chip on their shoulder because I think everybody has like sort of a standard of how Web3 is, and seeing someone deviate from that or try things differently, and maybe try experimenting something new that maybe didn't work out. They feel like, oh, like they did something wrong to me, and now for that reason I don't trust the game anymore. And I think it's that idea of like, hey, those were those original users, those original gamers, showing them like, hey, just give us a chance, let us figure out this Web3 stuff. Because at the end of the day, no one has really the formula for Web3. Exactly, everyone's still trying things out, and we still don't know if 5 years, 10 years down the road, everyone who's doing things right today will actually succeed in the long term. And I think that's really fair to ask as not only a gamer, but as a builder in this space yourself.
Yeah, I think what's kind of interesting about this is like, even, I've been around in Web3 gaming now for almost 3 years, pretty close. And we've seen the meta shift in Web3 gaming.
And I don't think it was called Web3 gaming back then, by the way.
So we've seen the meta shift like 4 times already. Like, I remember back when land was like the big hotness. Like, everybody wanted to do land. And then everybody wanted to do metaverses, and now we've got play to airdrop and all that stuff. And so like the meta is constantly shifting. And I think like we always knew that we were going to be like, I don't want to call it trailblazers because that's putting my head a little too far up my ass, but like trailblazers in terms of like what we were focusing on. Because I think a lot of games out here talk about like, hey, we focus on fun first, we focus on product first. I don't think anybody lives that as much as we do. Like, we literally only focus on gameplay and product to a fault. Like, that was a mistake. And I think the way that I would put it right now is like, when you think about, if I was to make a brand new game in Web3, let's say a year ago versus now, and someone gave me $5 million to do it, my instinct as a product and a game designer is to spend $4.5 million on it, making the game as great as possible, and then $500K on like, okay, we need a little bit of marketing and stuff. Maybe we'll have an event. In reality, what most Web3 games are doing is spending like $1 million on the game and then $4 million on everything else. And there's obviously some in between, but I think one of the problems is, and I kind of alluded to this on the point about VCs earlier, is like, you almost want to build your game and build your Web3 community with the prospect of trying to bring in more money.
Right.
Versus trying to build for like success. It's like, what milestone do I need to hit to actually be able to bring in more money? And so I talk a lot about this of like, look, our Web 2.5 plan, whatever you want to call it, was solid. But the problem was resources. If I had $50 million in the bank, like some of these other Web3 games, we actually could have executed that strategy and probably pulled it off. So it's kind of like this catch-22 of like, there's things that you want to focus on that you can't, because you don't have the resources, and you can't go get the resources because nobody cares about the thing that you're focusing on at that moment. And so it's a little bit of a catch-22. And I think like, obviously a lot of people that are skeptic on our stuff is like, yeah, guys, like, I think this would have worked. Like, it's not my fault, but it is my fault. And it goes both ways. So I don't think there's like a clear answer to that, but I think like it's all about resources. It's all about timing. It's all about focus on what you have to focus on at the time out of necessity. And I envy the games that that can focus on whatever they want, where they don't have that necessity out. And I hope that we're at that stage soon. So we'll see.
I think you said something very interesting that I think needs to be highlighted a little earlier, because it is very true. And I think anyone that tells you otherwise is lying to themselves and just doesn't want to admit it. Most players who are in Web3 are not here for fun games. Everyone is chasing the next play to airdrop. Everyone is chasing the next farming token that they can grind to then just make some money and then move on to the next campaign right after that. I think there's very limited amount of people who are here to actually just enjoy fun games. And thankfully, I'm very blessed to be surrounded by them, because I'm constantly playing games just for fun. And thankfully, some of those are now starting to have Web3 components to it. So when we heard of Sparkball, we're like, dude, this could be a hit, And then now that we have you here on the show, we're really excited to see how you take those Web3 components, and maybe you find the secret sauce that everyone's trying to find and everyone's just sort of trying to figure out. But with that, you guys are also bringing your Spark token. How are you guys planning to bring that in together without getting it too deep into the Sparkball game itself?
Yeah, I mean, I think basically the Spark token is basically the ecosystem token. And again, not to sound like a broken record, because I know this is what everyone's going to say, but it's the platform. And the best way that I can describe this is essentially BattleNet. Like BattleNet meets Unreal for Fortnite. So if you've ever played a Blizzard game, you log into BattleNet and it basically kind of governs their entire ecosystem. So for example, like we have a monthly sub. So Sparkball is not a free to play game. It's a very small like purchase price, but then you monthly sub. But basically all of the content is achievable for free. It's like very friendly monetization within Sparkball. But that monthly sub doesn't just sub you to Sparkball, it subs you to the entire ecosystem. And so we want to be able to like have that token go, throughout the entire ecosystem on utility around that. And then you can almost think of it like Sparkball is basically all this giant data. It's like this content and it's this data, and all of that content and all of that data is being exposed into the platform itself. And now what we do on that platform with the token is kind of up to us with the Fantasy Sparkball and the UGC and everything like that. So I would just point it out as like more of an ecosystem than anything else.
Right. The token's not designed to be an in-game asset so
Correct.
much as it's designed to be the piece that ties the whole ecosystem together.
Exactly. Yeah.
Cool. Easy. Well said. I only have 2 more questions for you. The first is, this call ends, the podcast is over. What are you going to work on right now? What is the today focus?
It's a fun question.
Sparkball.
This is stupid. We just hit 100K Twitter followers. So we're making an image right now of 100K
nice.
for 100K. So that is literally my next message, but that's completely irrelevant. I think we've been doing, this is interesting. Obviously like the Web3 element, like that's what most of my day is going to be spent on, is we're still like ramping up marketing. We've got a lot of partnerships. I think we had 2 playtests ongoing while we're on this call right now. So there's a lot of stuff we're still trying to hash out. We're putting together an ambassador program, like kind of community building and marketing on that. I think on the game side, which is obviously my favorite to work on, which I don't get to do as much anymore. I think that we've kind of reignited some love with Sparkball, which is really cool to see. And so we're getting a lot of new feedback in. And we've been playing super sweaty competitive games for 3 or 4 hours every night this week. And I think we're coming out of that with like a lot of changes and interesting things. So I think we're constantly trying to reel in of like, oh, here's all the things we want to do within the game loop of Sparkball versus we can't alter that much because we have to focus on other things. So yeah, I mean, most of my day is going to be spent on the Web3 stuff. But there's just constantly random game stuff going on in the background, little tiny frustrations that people have, like, oh, I just got scored on this way. That doesn't feel good. Okay, well, how do we fix this? How do we do this?
And the competitive play style is going to look drastically different than a casual play style. And you're not
100%.
seeing that until you get all these comp guys playing.
So that is actually something that we really have to, like, that we learned from early access last year. And I say this all the time. If you listen to anything that I'm involved in, you're probably sick of hearing me say this. There is a huge difference between someone coming in to see if they like a game versus I want to like this game. And so let's say Caesar and Matt, you guys reach out to some of your friends and you guys say, hey, this game is awesome. You guys got to come play it. Those people already have a predisposition to liking Sparkle.
Right.
Whereas when we launched early access last year, nobody knew about us. And so everybody came in and they were just like, do I like this game? And like most people said, yeah, holy crap, I actually do really like this. This is great. But what we see is that when you play Sparkball for the first time, if you've never seen a real game of Sparkball being played, it sucks. Like you are terrible. Like if you have 8 brand new players of Sparkball playing a game,
so that was my first 1v1 with Caesar. Exactly. Never played League, never played Dota, never played that genre at all.
Exactly.
And he dunked on me pretty darn hard the first round.
Well, I think it's worse in 4v4 because what happens is, like, imagine dropping 10 players who have never played League of Legends into League of Legends. You would no longer have these lane assignments. Nobody would understand what the jungle is. No one would understand what the objectives are. People would it's scattered and it's not structured. And that's what happens the first game of Sparkle, essentially. And so I think our goal over the next month and a half, 2 months, is that by the time we launch early access and open the doors, everybody can come play, that everybody has seen at least one game of actual real Sparkball being played. Because I think if someone came in and tuned into one of our sweaty competitive matches, you'd be like, okay, this looks way differently than the match that I just played. And our goal is to eventually have everybody to that level. Because even bronze players in League of Legends play the right way. They just suck. And that's me. That's not me insulting anybody also. But adding that structure and getting to that stage is just insanely important.
Yeah, when you're playing the game that's designed to be played, not one that you're just trying to figure out, it is so much more fun.
Yeah, we get so much feedback of like people coming in, they play 2 or 3 games, they're like, yeah, Chandler, I really had fun, but like I feel like there's not enough to do with the ball. And I'm like, watch this VOD of us playing sweaty competitive games and tell me again that there's not a lot to do with the ball, because like you just don't see it yet. And I think that's the really hard part, is we're a genre that doesn't really exist.
Yeah.
And it's a brand new game type, and
it's genre
it's
blending.
a brand new game mode, brand new game type. And so we have to teach people at the same time. We have a pretty big uphill battle to fight on that. But again, I think once people see it, like for example, you can use the bumpers to score in the tower.
I'm huge on
until you see that, you probably don't even realize it exists. So new players will come in and be like, guys, scoring in the tower is way too hard. And then they see the bump, they're like, oh, okay, my bad. I thought it was harder than it was. So it's stuff like that I think we just need to get people on board into, essentially.
Yeah,
exactly. The bumpers and the teleport from one side to the other, get behind them and score. Definitely the sauce if they haven't tried it. Yep. But yeah, I mean, I played with some people from the Wolves DAO yesterday. I mean, shout out to Icy. It was the first time him picking it up, and you can tell it was his first time picking it up. We tried to get him to pass the ball, and he was like, "Where's the ball? I didn't even know I had the ball." So it's definitely a slight learning curve. But by the end of that, like after an hour, like he was already knowing what to do, like passing it around. And so it's really good to see that it's very easy.
So we will be opening
if people want to play, if they want to play test, how can they get access to play?
Let's call it a month and a half, something like that. We don't know yet. Our questing, like our entire platform, goes live here in a couple weeks. So I would say the biggest thing to keep an eye out is just for that, start getting started and integrated into the ecosystem. We have play tests going on everywhere. So if you are part of a gaming community, or you are friends with a KOL or something like that, and they might already have a key, if they don't, just have them reach out to us and say, hey, I've got this small community of playing, like we just want to come in and hang out and try the game out. We have people organizing those for us all the time. So if you want to play, go find a community that is playing Sparkball, and get in. So it's a privatized test, but you can get in pretty easy if you just try. That's probably my answer.
Cool. Easy. We'll see you guys in the comments. Thank you for listening to 100X and Chandler tell us all about Sparkball. This was a blast, man. We're having a lot of fun. We cannot wait to see what happens when you guys go early access. We'll see you next time. Go flood Sparkball. They just hit 100,000 followers on Twitter. Give them 100,000 more. We'll see you guys next time.